This is a complex situation involving tenants' rights, real estate law, financial assistance, and potential conflict of interest/coercion. Here is an analysis, a summary of the dilemma, and potential solutions. Analysis of the situation. 1. Rental and eviction situation. Tenant's position. The young woman is likely a protected tenant due to her participation in a city government program for domestic violence victims and the associated rent subsidy, often referred to as Section 8 or similar local programs. No grounds for eviction. The landlord reportedly has no legal basis for eviction. The tenant would likely prevail in an eviction defense, as non-renewal of a subsidized lease often requires a good cause reason. Dilemma. Despite strong legal standing to stay, she's ready to leave to avoid conflict or simply move on, but must balance this with her financial stability. Landlord's position. The landlord's actions, threatening eviction/non-renewal without cause and the threat of a lien, suggest an attempt to pressure or coerce the tenant, possibly to recover the loan quickly or retaliate. Conflict of interest/coercion. The landlord provided a loan to the tenant for a separate legal matter, the inheritance/building transfer, and is now using their position as landlord to pressure the tenant regarding repayment and tenancy. This blurs the lines and could be seen as unethical or predatory lending/coercion depending on the terms and jurisdiction. 2. Financial and subsidy situation. Government assistance. The tenant relies on subsidized rent and food stamps. Risk of loss. Moving without securing a new subsidized unit or having sufficient private income could lead to the loss of her current housing subsidy. Subsidies are often tied to specific apartments or are difficult to port/transfer quickly. Moving out before the lease expires or an eviction proceeding concludes could complicate future assistance eligibility. Change in circumstances. She is now the primary landlord of an inherited building. This change in assets and potential income must be reported to the city government program managing her subsidy and food stamps. Failure to report a significant asset, the building, or income, potential rental income, is a violation that could lead to loss of benefits and potential penalties. 3. Inheritance and building ownership. New asset. The young woman is now the landlord/owner of her grandmother's building. Legal debt. She owes money to her current landlord for the lawyer's fees to complete the transfer. Lien threat. The current landlord's threat to place a lien against the new building is a serious legal maneuver to secure the debt, though they would likely need to sue for the debt first and obtain a judgment to legally file a lien, unless the loan agreement itself was secured by the property. Summary of the young lady's dilemma. The young lady is caught between two conflicting realities. 1. Housing security versus conflict. She has strong legal protection against eviction but is emotionally ready to leave the apartment to end the conflict with her landlord. 2. Financial stability versus new wealth. She relies on essential government subsidies, rent/food stamps, but has recently acquired a potentially valuable asset, the inherited building. 3. Debt versus asset control. She needs to manage the debt owed to her current landlord who is acting coercively, while gaining control over and starting to generate income from her new property to repay the loan and become financially independent. Her immediate problem is leaving the subsidized apartment without jeopardizing her financial safety net, while simultaneously managing her new property and debt. Potential solutions and next steps. The overall goal should be to secure a smooth financial transition from a subsidized tenant to an independent property owner, while resolving the current landlord dispute and securing housing. 1. Address the housing and subsidy situation. Immediate. Contact the program administrator. Immediately contact the city government program, e.g., the housing authority, that manages her rent subsidy and food stamps. Inquire about portability. Ask about the process for porting, transferring her subsidy to a new unit, or securing an emergency transfer voucher, given the landlord conflict. Report the asset. Crucially, report the inheritance and new building ownership. The program will determine the impact on her eligibility. They may allow her a grace period to liquidate or generate income from the asset. Honesty is mandatory to avoid fraud charges and loss of benefits. Seek legal aid. Re-engage the lawyer who handled the real estate transaction, or find a tenant rights attorney or legal aid society specializing in housing to review the eviction. Advise her on the best legal way to transition out of the apartment without forfeiting her subsidy benefits. Review the loan agreement. Analyze the debt to the landlord and the validity of the lien threat. 2. Address the inheritance and debt, medium term, property assessment and management. Determine property value and status. Get a professional assessment/appraisal of the inherited building. Secure the building. Ensure the building is properly secured, insured, and assessed for immediate repair needs. Generate income. If feasible, begin the process of preparing the building to generate rental income quickly, e.g., hire a property manager, address immediate code violations, formalize the debt repayment, negotiate repayment. Instead of being coerced, the young woman should have her attorney formalize a repayment plan for the loan using future rental income or proceeds from a refinancing/sale of the new property. This removes the landlord's leverage over her tenancy. Address the lien threat. If the current landlord files a lien without a judgment, her lawyer can fight it. The best solution is a structured repayment to make the lien threat moot. 3. Long-term financial planning. Long-term financial coaching. Connect with a non-profit financial counselor or property ownership resource center. She needs a plan to transition from relying on subsidies to using the building as a basis for self-sufficiency. Determine the building's future. Decide whether to keep and manage the building for long-term income or sell it to pay off the debt and use the remaining equity to buy a smaller home or invest. Would you like me to search for organizations that provide free or low-cost legal aid for tenants or housing assistance programs in a specific city or state? Or should I search for resources on reporting changes in assets to government benefit programs? This is a critical juncture for the young woman, requiring immediate and strategic legal, financial, and housing steps. Summary of the situation and dilemma. 1. Coerced eviction and protected status. The young woman is a protected tenant through a city government program for domestic violence victims, likely under federal laws like the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, which prevents eviction or denial of subsidized housing solely due to her status as a victim. The landlord has no legal grounds to evict or not renew the lease. The landlord's threat of eviction/non-renewal, combined with the threat of a lien on her newly inherited property, appears to be an attempt to coerce her into quickly repaying the loan provided for her legal fees. 2. Financial assistance versus new asset. She is currently dependent on government subsidies, food stamps, and subsidized rent. She has just become the primary landlord of an inherited building, which is a significant asset and potential source of income. This change must be immediately reported to the government agencies, Housing Authority, and SNAP/food stamps to avoid penalties, fraud accusations, and loss of benefits. 3. The core dilemma. She wants to leave the apartment to escape the conflict, but doing so without a plan could cause her to lose her housing subsidy and immediate financial stability before she can generate income from the new building. She must resolve the debt to her current landlord while navigating the regulatory requirements of her benefit programs. Potential solutions and next steps. The goal is to transition from a subsidized tenant to a self-sufficient property owner in the safest and most legally compliant way. 1. Immediate legal and subsidy review. Tenant rights legal aid. Contact a free or low-cost legal aid society specializing in housing/tenant rights, particularly for subsidized housing tenants and domestic violence survivors. The search results show several such organizations. An attorney can send a letter to the landlord asserting the tenant's VAWA and subsidized housing protections, challenging the eviction threat, and handling the debt negotiation. VAWA protection. Her status as a domestic violence victim likely provides strong protection against termination of tenancy in federally subsidized housing. Report the inheritance. She must immediately report the property ownership to the city/federal agencies running her rent subsidy and food stamp (SNAP) programs. Housing subsidy, e.g. Section 8. In subsidized housing, assets, like the building itself, are generally not counted against eligibility unless they generate income, but there are new rules, like HOTMA, that place limits on asset value. Rental income derived from the property will be counted as income and could impact her eligibility. She needs a clear plan from the Housing Authority. Food stamps, SNAP. SNAP typically has an asset limit which the building might exceed, putting her benefits at risk. She needs to understand her state's rules immediately. 2. Managing the debt and new asset. Formalize debt repayment. Her attorney should formally negotiate with the current landlord/lender to set up a repayment plan for the lawyer's fees using projected income from the inherited building. This removes the leverage the landlord has over her tenancy. Challenge the lien threat. A landlord/lender typically needs to sue for the debt and obtain a court judgment before a lien can be legally placed on property, unless the original loan agreement was a secured mortgage. Her lawyer should be ready to challenge any attempt by the landlord to unlawfully file a lien. Stabilize the inherited building. She should prioritize securing insurance, assessing its value, and either hiring a property manager to begin generating income or working with a real estate attorney/advisor to sell it quickly to pay off the debt and stabilize her finances. 3. The move. Portability of subsidy. If she wants to move, she must work with the Housing Authority to transfer her subsidy to a new unit. She should not move out until the subsidy transfer is approved or the legal aid attorney advises her on a safe exit strategy that won't jeopardize her benefits. This situation requires professional help to manage the transition from a vulnerable tenant to a property owner, ensuring legal compliance and financial safety throughout. I found a video with information about a legal aid society that helps with housing issues for low-income clients, including domestic violence victims. This video is relevant because it discusses legal aid resources that the young lady needs to contact to assert her tenant rights and handle the coercive landlord situation. Yes, it is absolutely possible for her to transition from her current situation while retaining some financial stability, but it requires immediate, careful, and strategic action in 3 main areas. Here is a breakdown of the possibilities and the crucial steps she must take. Possibility of keeping subsidized housing. It is possible to maintain her subsidized housing, like Section 8/voucher programs, or transition out gracefully if she follows the rules for reporting assets. Tenant protections, VEWA. She has a very strong legal defense against eviction based on her status as a domestic violence victim under the Violence Against Women Act, VEWA. The landlord cannot evict her without cause. This gives her leverage and time to plan her move without being rushed. Property as an asset. For housing subsidy programs, HUD Section 8, the inheritance of a lump sum or asset, like a building, is generally not counted as income in the month it is received. It becomes a countable asset afterward. The key is income. Her eligibility will be affected by the rental income she starts generating from the building. She must report this income immediately. Asset limits. While many HUD programs do not have an asset limit, new federal rules, HOTMA, have introduced an asset cap. She must check the specific rules of her city's program, but proper planning, like putting the money into a special needs trust, if applicable, or using the proceeds to pay down the debt and the lawyer's fees, can help. Possibility of keeping food stamps, SNAP. This is the most immediate financial risk because the building's value likely exceeds the asset limit for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP/food stamps. Asset limits. Unlike housing subsidies, SNAP typically has strict asset limits, often around $2,750 for most households. Owning a second property, the inherited building that she doesn't live in, will almost certainly be considered a non-exempt asset and put her eligibility at risk. The solution is time and spend down. She must immediately report the asset. If the building's value puts her over the limit, she will lose her benefits. Her strategy must be to monetize the asset quickly, sell it, or take a loan against it, and use the funds for spend down on non-countable items, like paying off debt, purchasing a primary residence, or covering essential repairs on the inherited building if she intends to sell it, before her benefits are cut off. Action plan for success. The transition requires a two-pronged approach: legal protection for her housing and financial strategy for her benefits. 1. Secure legal and financial expertise. Tenant rights attorney. She needs a lawyer to formally challenge the eviction and negotiate a safe exit plan from the apartment that preserves her ability to port the subsidy, if she wants to keep it. Specialized benefits attorney. She needs to consult with an attorney specializing in asset protection for government benefit recipients. This expert can advise her on the most compliant way to report the property, whether a special needs trust or similar vehicle could shelter the asset/income without jeopardizing her SNAP/subsidy eligibility, the best path to repay the loan to her current landlord without the landlord placing an illegal or coercive lien. 2. Prioritize reporting and debt resolution. Report the asset now. She must contact both the housing authority and the SNAP office immediately to report the inheritance. Honesty is crucial to avoid fraud charges and long-term ineligibility. Negotiate the loan. Her attorney must manage the loan with the current landlord. She can use a portion of the inherited building's equity, or future sale/rental proceeds, to pay off the debt and nullify the landlord's threat and leverage over her current tenancy. It is possible for her to succeed by using the inherited asset to gain financial independence, but she must follow the strict rules of her benefit programs during this transitional period. Would you like me to find nonprofit organizations that offer financial counseling for new property owners or advice on managing government benefits with an inheritance? That is a highly complex and potentially risky strategy that requires careful legal and financial maneuvering to avoid losing her benefits and facing legal complications. This approach involves two separate legal concepts: real estate law, the LLC, and public benefits law, subsidized housing in SNAP. 1. Possibility. Moving into the building, primary residence. This is the most crucial step for preserving her benefits. For SNAP, food stamps, a person's primary residence is typically an excluded asset for the SNAP resource test. If she moves into the inherited building and makes it her primary residence, the value of the house itself should no longer count against her SNAP asset limit. This could allow her to retain her food stamp benefits assuming her income remains low enough. Action needed. She must notify the SNAP office that she has moved and the new house is her primary residence. For subsidized housing, e.g. Section 8, if she acquires a house and moves into it, she will be required to terminate her subsidized housing voucher/lease because she no longer qualifies as a low-income tenant needing subsidized rental assistance. Exception. Some programs have a Section 8 homeownership program, HCV homeownership, that allows a voucher to be used for mortgage payments. She would need to check if her local housing authority offers this and if the inherited building qualifies. If not, she must plan to lose the rental subsidy but gain the equity in her own home. 2. Possibility. Putting the building under an LLC. Forming a limited liability company, LLC, is an excellent way to manage rental property for liability protection, but it introduces complexity concerning her benefits. Program. Impact of owning a building through an LLC. Housing subsidy, HUD. Income from the LLC, rental profits, is treated as self-employment income and must be reported. This will increase her household income, potentially making her ineligible for the subsidized housing program. SNAP, food stamps. The net income from the LLC, rental profits minus expenses like mortgage interest, taxes, and repairs, is counted as self-employment income. The net profit will affect her eligibility and benefit amount. Liability, positive. An LLC protects her personal assets from liabilities, e.g. if a non-tenant is injured on the property. This is smart management. Taxes and management. Complex. The LLC will require annual filings, potentially higher fees, and a separate bank account to maintain the liability protection. She must track the building's maintenance/mortgage payments as business expenses. 3. Combining both strategies, high-risk transition. If she transfers the building to an LLC and moves into it, the situation becomes tenant status. She ceases to be a subsidized tenant and becomes a homeowner/LLC manager. She must surrender her current subsidized apartment. SNAP status. Her primary residence is still protected, but her LLC membership means she has self-employment income/loss from any rental units in the building, assuming it has more than one unit. She must accurately report the net income/loss to the SNAP office. The crucial debt issue. She needs to use the LLC structure to pay off the loan to her current landlord. This repayment is a legitimate use of the building's assets/equity, and her lawyer should negotiate this to legally discharge the debt and stop the landlord's coercion. Conclusion and recommended next step. Her strategy to move into the building is excellent for preserving her SNAP benefits by making it her primary residence. Using an LLC is excellent for liability protection but complicates her income reporting. She cannot execute this without a specialist. 1. She needs a real estate/benefits attorney to structure the LLC and the transfer of the deed while simultaneously advising on how to report the net income to HUD/SNAP. 2. She needs a repayment plan for the landlord's loan, executed through the LLC to extinguish the debt and end the coercion. Would you like me to find resources for free or low-cost legal and financial counseling that can assist with self-employment income reporting and real estate/asset management while on government benefits? The term coercion, and its close relative duress, refers to the act of compelling someone to act against their will through the use of force, threats, or improper pressure. In a legal context, a contract or agreement entered into under coercion is generally considered voidable, meaning the coerced party can choose to cancel it, because it lacks the necessary element of free consent or free will. The situation involving the young lady and her landlord appears to be a form of economic coercion or duress. Key grounds of coercion, legal elements. To legally prove an action was coerced, a party typically needs to demonstrate the following elements. 1. Illegitimate pressure or threat. This is the core element. The coercing party used a threat or applied improper pressure that the law considers illegitimate. This can include threats of physical harm or violence, traditional duress, threats of unlawful action, such as an illegal eviction or filing a lien without proper legal grounds. Economic duress, a threat to breach a binding contract or an abuse of a superior economic position to force an agreement, leaving the victim with no reasonable alternative. 2. Lack of reasonable alternative. The pressure was so severe or significant that the victim felt they had no reasonable alternative but to comply with the demand. If the victim could have easily avoided the threat, e.g., by reporting it to authorities, seeking independent advice, or obtaining the desired outcome elsewhere, the claim of coercion is weakened. 3. Causation. The illegitimate pressure or threat was a significant cause that induced the victim to act, sign an agreement, vacate an apartment, etc. In other words, the victim would not have taken the action had the threat not been present. How the landlord's actions fit the grounds of coercion. In the young lady's situation, the landlord's actions exhibit strong elements of improper pressure and economic coercion. Landlord's action. Grounds of coercion. Threatening eviction/non-renewal. The landlord is threatening to terminate her tenancy without legal cause, despite her strong protections under the VAWA and subsidized housing laws. This is a threat of an unlawful action to compel a desired response. Repayment. Using tenancy to collect separate debt. The landlord is using their position of authority, as a landlord of subsidized housing, and the tenant's reliance on her home to pressure her into resolving a separate real estate debt. This blurs the lines and exploits her housing vulnerability for financial gain. Threatening a lien on new property. Threatening to file a lien on her inherited building, which is separate from the tenancy, is an attempt to exert economic pressure, using one source of financial security to compromise another. The legal argument would be that the landlord's actions, threatening the loss of her protected home and financial security, destroy her free will and compel her to leave and/or quickly repay the debt to avoid further conflict, despite having a strong legal right to stay. If you'd like to delve into this further, explore the difference between duress and undue influence in contract law. YouTube video views will be stored in your YouTube history, and your data will be stored and used by YouTube according to its terms of service. The principles of coercion and economic duress applied directly and powerfully to the young woman's situation, forming the basis of her legal defense against the landlord's actions. Here is how the grounds of coercion apply. Application of coercion to the young lady's situation. The landlord is allegedly leveraging their position of power and the young lady's vulnerable status to secure the repayment of a separate personal loan. 1. The illegitimate pressure/threat. The landlord's threat is illegitimate and unlawful in two major ways. Threatening unlawful eviction. The young lady is a protected tenant, likely under VAWA and subsidized housing rules. Evicting a subsidized tenant or refusing to renew their lease requires good cause, e.g., serious lease violations. The landlord's threat of non-renewal or eviction without cause is an illegal threat intended to compel her to move out or pay the debt. Abuse of a fiduciary/power relationship, economic duress. The landlord is exploiting the young lady's need for a stable, subsidized home, her immediate survival need, to exert pressure over a separate, private financial transaction, the loan for the lawyer's fees. The threat. If you don't agree to my terms for the loan repayment, I will use my power as your landlord to put you out of your home. The landlord's leverage. The landlord holds the power over her housing, which is a life necessity. Using this leverage to resolve a debt unrelated to the tenancy is a classic case of improper economic pressure or coercion. 2. Lack of reasonable alternative. The coercion argument is strong because, from the young lady's perspective, she has no reasonable alternative that protects both her home and her financial stability. Option 1. Stay and fight. She could fight the eviction, but she would have to endure a stressful and lengthy legal battle while facing hostility from the person who controls her housing. Option 2. Leave voluntarily. If she leaves the apartment without a plan, she risks losing her essential housing subsidy and food stamps, plunging her into homelessness and financial crisis, which is not a reasonable choice given her circumstances. Option 3. Succumb to pressure. She could agree to the landlord's demands regarding the loan, potentially unfavorable terms or a quick sale of her inherited property, just to stop the landlord from threatening her housing. The coercion arises because the landlord's threats remove her ability to address the debt dispute independently of her housing needs. 3. Causation. The landlord's threats are directly causing her dilemma and her desire to leave. She is ready to walk away from a protected, subsidized home not because she wants to, but because the landlord is creating an untenable and hostile environment through the threats of eviction and the lien. Strategic takeaway for the young lady. She should rely on legal counsel to use the coercion argument in two ways. 1. Defense against eviction. Her attorney can inform the housing authority and the landlord that the non-renewal/eviction is retaliatory and coercive, violating VAWA and subsidized housing regulations. 2. Negotiation of debt. Her attorney can use the coercion claim as leverage to negotiate a fair, structured repayment plan for the lawyer's fees, removing the debt from the tenancy relationship. This is why securing a tenant rights attorney immediately is the single most critical step. Would you like me to find resources for organizations that specialize in providing legal aid to domestic violence survivors in housing disputes? This is a serious situation where the young lady needs immediate specialized legal assistance to protect her housing and her rights. In New York, particularly New York City, NYC, there are numerous organizations that provide free legal aid and are experts in the intersection of housing law, subsidized housing like Section 8 or an NYCA, and protections under the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, which applies to all victims regardless of gender. Here are the key resources in New York, focusing on organizations that handle housing and domestic violence disputes. New York Legal Resources for Housing and Domestic Violence. 1. New York State Hotlines and General Resources, Resource, Service. Contact information. NY State Domestic Violence Hotline. 24-hour confidential support, safety planning, and referrals. Call 1-800-942-6906, English and Espanol, multilanguage. Text 844-997-2121. NYC 24-hour domestic violence hotline. Immediate safety planning, shelter assistance, and referrals. Call 1-800-621-HOPE, 4673. NYC Family Justice Centers. Walk-in centers in all 5 boroughs for help with benefits, housing, counseling, financial, and legal issues. Find a center. NYC Family Justice Centers. No appointment needed. 2. Legal services organizations. Free representation for tenants. These organizations are best positioned to take on the landlord directly, often for free, especially since the young woman may be low income. Legal Services, NYC, LSNYC, one of the largest providers of free civil legal services in the city. They have dedicated domestic violence and housing units. Phone 917661450. Website, link to legalservicesnyc.org. New York Legal Assistance Group, NYLAG. NYLAG has a specialized domestic violence law unit that focuses on empowering survivors to achieve safety and stability, including through housing advocacy. Phone 212-613-5000. Website, link to nylag.org. The Legal Aid Society, the largest and oldest organization of its kind in the nation. They provide comprehensive services for tenants, including those in subsidized housing facing eviction. Manhattan, 212-426-3000. Brooklyn, 718-722-3100. They have offices in all 5 boroughs. Call the main number for the relevant borough. Sanctuary for Families, a dedicated resource for survivors, providing services like crisis intervention, shelter, and legal representation in family, matrimonial, and immigration law, which often includes housing support. Phone 212-3496-009, extension 1367. 3. NYC Government and Housing Specific Resources. NYC Right to Counsel. Universal access to legal services. The young lady has the right to free legal representation if she is a low-income tenant facing eviction in housing court. If she is served with any court papers, she should immediately go to her first court appearance and say, "I would like an attorney." NYC Tenant Helpline. Call 311 and ask for the Tenant Helpline. NYC Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD-VAWA office. Since she is in subsidized housing, she should contact the city's VAWA office for assistance specific to her voucher protections. HPD Division of Tenant Resources, 9172-864-300. Email dtr_vawa@hpd.nyc.gov. Recommendation: the most effective first step is to call one of the specialized legal services organizations, like Legal Services NYC or NYLAG, or visit a family justice center. They can quickly assess her eligibility for free legal services and start the process of formally invoking her VAWA protections to stop the landlord's coercive eviction threats.